Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, and I'm here to answer your questions about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether it's The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, any of it. I'm the guy you come to. I'm always teaching and learning about the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, last week I know I promised an extra video that I was going to upload over the weekend. That's part of a series. I didn't get to do it. I wasn't feeling well this past weekend. I was still sort of recovering from COVID, and I found that I was also having like a major sort of allergy attack that I'm only now recovering from now. And also, I think I was trying to bounce back from having COVID a little too quickly. So, this coming weekend, we'll get that video up. But anyway, let's start as we usually do with the reading, and because I'm sort of in the mood, we're going to read a passage from Beren and Lúthien. And this specific one is from a second extract from the Eye of Lúthien, which is sort of the one of the earlier versions that was written specifically with the legendarium in mind. That being said, this version does have a lot of the more common names. So I'm going to read you like the first bit of this. So let's do this. An end there came when fortune turned, and flames of Morgoth's vengeance burned, and all the might which he prepared in secret in his fastness flared and poured across the thirsty plain, and armies black were in his train. The leaguer of Angband Morgoth broke. His enemies in fire and smoke were scattered, and the orcs there slew and slew, until the blood like dew dripped from each cruel and crooked blade. Then Barahir the bold did aid with mighty spear, with shield and men, Felagund wounded. To the fen escaping, there they bound their troth, and Felagund deeply swore an oath of friendship to his kin and seed, of love and succour in time of need. But there of Finrod's children 4 were Angrod slain, and proud Egnor. Felagund and Orodreth then gathered the remnant of their men, their maidens and their children fair. Forsaking war they made their lair, and cavernous hole far in the south. On Narog's towering bank its mouth was opened, which they hid and veiled, and mighty doors that unassailed, till Turin's day stood vast and grim. They built by trees o'ershadowed dim, and with them dwelt a long time there Curufin and Celegorm the fair. A mighty folk grew neath their hands, in Narog's secret halls and lands. Not a very long excerpt, but I didn't want to go into the whole... you get sucked into it, you know what I'm saying? I didn't want to get too sucked into it. I had to stop there. All right, well, there's your reading. So we're going to get to your questions. I have 15 questions to go through this time. And let's start with that. Okay. So where am I starting? Here am I starting. Okay. Okay, so let's start with this one here. This is a question that was requested by Ido. Why did Sauron choose to gamble so much of his power in the ring on the plan to control the wearers of the others? Couldn't he have used his innate power as a Maya to conquer anyway? Sauron's powers were not infinite, nor would he see the ring as a gambit. Sauron's creation of the ring was to dominate others, as you pointed out, and to keep his power from dwindling by housing his essence in a vessel. His power was not infinite, and he knew this. He saw firsthand his master, Morgoth, much greater than he, diminish greatly in power due to spreading it out too much. Morgoth's ring, not the literal ring. He didn't have a literal ring. But what he put his power into was the planet itself, was Arda. He put his very essence into the world. Now, with Sauron, by choosing a ring, which he could then wear, he was keeping his power close to him. the ring was not easily separated from Sauron. He had to be defeated in battle, which came at great cost, many lives, including Elendil and Gil-galad. And Isildur had to think fast to cut off his finger. Many would not have even thought to do that. And he had to cut off his finger. He couldn't just grab the ring and pull it off because Sauron's hands were like burning fire. No one could very easily remove the ring. He had to pretty much be defeated, and it was at a great cost. So from Sauron's perspective, it wasn't really a gamble. Yes, it was the key to his defeat, but he didn't see a way that his enemies could gain the ring. It's not like he was leaving it around. Okay, next question. This one's really fun because we don't get to talk about the original Hobbit film all that much, and I'm not even talking about the Rankin Bass film because there was one before that. So this was submitted by It's a City of Apes, which I think you're referencing Planet of the Apes there, one of my favorite films of all time. But anyway, It's a City of Apes asks, what did Tolkien think of the 1967 short The Hobbit by Gene Deitch? Tolkien had no recorded comment on the short. And there's a good reason for that. As far as I could find, Tolkien never spoke about it on the record. He never wrote about the earliest Hobbit adaptation, and this is likely because no one asked. No one ever asked him about it. The Hobbit short was sort of a scam. The rights to The Hobbit were secured by a guy named William Snyder, and the window for that, there's always a window. When you sell rights to a movie, it isn't in perpetuity. There's a certain amount of time, and in this case it was from 1964 through to 1967. And the way these sort of things work, that is, if in that window a film is made, and there are further stipulations depending on the contract, which I will get to in a moment, the rights will extend further, and then you can hold on to the rights for another period of time, usually the same amount of time, just redoubled, sort of. But if nothing is produced, or at least nothing that meets the specific criteria of whatever contract is being signed, the rights will revert back to the original holder, which would have been Tolkien. So, not having the resources or the desire to produce a full film, Snyder asked Deitch to produce what is known as an ashcan. So an ashcan is usually a cheap film that is released. It's not always released, but usually there's a limited release if they're required to do so. Sometimes the contract is only that something has to be made and not released. And a lot of times ashcans are not designed to be released at all, but they're made as a sort of a copyright loophole. Some ashcan films were released. For example, Marvel's Fantastic Four, there have been 4 films that were made based on it, and 3 of them were ashcans, believe it or not. 3 of them were made specifically to extend the period of having the rights. And out of those 3 ashcans, 2 of them were released theatrically. So that's interesting. But anyway, getting back to Tolkien, the Hobbit film, it was only about 12 minutes long. I think it was a little less than 12 minutes long, actually. It didn't have much in common with The Hobbit, other than there was a guy named Bilbo, there was Gandalf, the Arkenstone, and there were a lot of changes. The trolls were called groans, and they didn't turn to stone, they turned into trees. Bilbo used the Arkenstone to kill the dragon, who was named Slag, and he married a princess. The film had to be shown at least once to a paying audience to retain the rights. That was the stipulations of that specific contract. So it was shown in a projection room in New York City, and it was actually the very day before the rights were going to lapse. And the people that attended were actually given dimes. They were each given a dime that they could then pay back. So they're like, here's a dime. Okay, now give me that. That'll get you in. And the point of that was that it had to be shown to a paying audience. So nobody ever said that they couldn't give the audience the money and then they would be paid back. The film was never shown again, and it was actually believed for the longest time to be lost media, and this is probably why Tolkien never commented on it, unless he commented on it, privately, which there was no comments in any of his published letters, at least. It only resurfaced in 2012, so that's well after Tolkien's death in 1973. So the vast majority of Tolkien fans were not aware of it The only people that might have been aware of it were the people that produced it and the people that were there that saw it, who were probably not Tolkien fans. They were probably people that worked on the film, or that were the families of people that worked on the film, and it wasn't a very great many people, and it probably wasn't all that memorable, just being pulled into a room, being given a dime, having the dime taken back, and then watching a 12-minute cartoon that doesn't make any sense, and it was back in the 60s. It's probably not something that a lot of people remembered. So, and they might have been asked not to talk about it even, too. So, because nobody was asking Tolkien about it, and he probably didn't want to talk about it, and there's a very good reason to believe that he probably didn't see it, because only those people at that time saw it. It only got out into the public consciousness in 2012. So it's possible that Tolkien never even saw it. And if that's the case, he never saw any adaptation of The Hobbit or of The Lord of the Rings, at least on film he produced. There were, of course, radio adaptations. But he died before the Rankin Bass cartoon came out, and Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings as well. So, he didn't see any animated adaptations, or live-action ones for that fashion. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Next question is anonymous. How does Sauron's... this one's so funny. I included this one specifically because it's funny. Hold on one second. I just need to look. Somebody tag me on something. How does Sauron's eye sit on the tower and even get there in the first place? Please don't say magic. So let me get this straight. You want to know the logistics of a magic fallen angel putting an all-seeing magic eye on the top of his magic dark tower in his evil magic land, but the answer can't be magic? The Eye of Sauron, it's not actually Sauron. It's not his literal eye. It's, wait for it, it's a spell. It's essentially a spell cast upon the tower, Barad-dûr, so that Sauron can see far and wide. He has a physical body, despite the contradictory lines in Peter Jackson's film, and he resides in the tower. There is no explanation for the eye other than magic. The eye is magic. You are talking about a fallen angel casting a spell. There's no mundane explanation for the Eye of Sauron. Some people will try to tell you that there is no actual Eye of Sauron and that it's a metaphor, but it is literal. It's just not the embodiment of Sauron. Frodo saw the Eye of Sauron when he looked into Galadriel's mirror, and the eye was used as a symbol by Sauron's army, and they even refer to Sauron as the Eye. So that's not indicating that he is the Eye, but that's just what they called him. So Sauron's tower is magic itself. It was constructed by his will, which is why it fell apart after the destruction of the One Ring. He no longer had enough power to hold physical objects like that together. Sorry to disappoint you, but it's magic. Moving on. This one is also anonymous. As a wizard, why does Gandalf rely more on a sword than magic? Probably because you're misunderstanding the meaning of the word wizard, but also because you're misunderstanding how magic works in Tolkien's world. To start with the first point, let's go to the Oxford English Dictionary. And the reason I'm choosing the Oxford English Dictionary, because one of the chief contributors to the dictionary was J.R.R. Tolkien himself. He pretty much wrote the dictionary. And Oxford English Dictionary defines wizard as a philosopher or wise man. Now, does that sound more like Gandalf, or does that sound more like Harry Potter? Of course it sounds more like Gandalf, because that's what a wizard is. The word wizard even comes from wise. Tolkien does acknowledge the more archaic term for wizard, which was a contemptuous and sardonic term for a magic user, and he mentions it in the index to The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to read that part for you. Wizard, one of the Order of the Astari, and then all the pages that's mentioned are listed. See also names of individual wizard. Example, Gandalf. The word wizard often refers specifically to Gandalf and is also used casually to refer to a magician, anyone credited with strange powers, contemptuously, wizardry, magic, of kind popularity. So wizards in Tolkien's world are referred to as Istari, which is derived from the Quenya word Ista, which means to know. it gets Englished as the wise or simply wizards, though, of course, Gandalf uses magic. His power is not sorcery, it's divine. He's an angel. He's not a sorcerer. To get to the second aspect of this, Gandalf does use magic, but he doesn't often use what we would refer to as combat magic. This is partly because of a mandate from the Valar to not use power against power. Gandalf is there to inspire and to lead, not to fight Middle-earth's battles for them. It's also due to the fact that he is incarnated, which means that he is made flesh. He has a real body, and he cannot access much of his great power. Even as Gandalf the White, he is limited in that way. Magic also tends to be subtle and unseen in Tolkien's world. Now, Gandalf will occasionally use combat magic. This mostly happened in The Hobbit. But in The Lord of the Rings, it's actually brought up very quickly in the beginning of Book 2 when they're trying to go through the Pass of Carithris, and there's a snowstorm, and they can't get a fire going. Even Gimli can't get the fire going. And they ask Gandalf to start the fire. And you would think it's just something very simple. All he has to do is point his finger at the wood, and it'll just burst into flames, and they'll have a nice fire. And he does it reluctantly. And he says, I might as well have just written Gandalf was here in glowing letters on the side of the mountain, because the mission to destroy the ring was a mission of stealth. Especially in its early stages. They weren't trying to draw attention, and combat magic and that sort of flashiness, it all draws a lot of attention. Now, a lot of people talk about Gandalf's ring, the Ring of Fire, but its function was to bolster his own stamina and to give him aid and comfort, to aid him in inspiring others to courage. That's what Círdan said when he gave him the ring. So, basically, when Gandalf is called a wizard, it means exactly what the dictionary at least that Tolkien helped write, says. He is a philosopher, he is a sage, he is a wise man, he knows a lot. Yes, he has magic powers, but that is not what makes him a wizard. Okay, next question, and we're going back to Hobbit cartoons here for another anonymous question. What did Tolkien think of the Rankin Bass adaptation of The Hobbit? So, Tolkien died before he could see it, so sorry. So I'm sorry, but telling somebody I'm busy and then they have to be like, okay, like, just don't reply if I say I'm busy. Okay. So Tolkien didn't think anything of the Rankin Bass adaptation. He didn't see it. Now, perhaps you didn't say J.R.R. Tolkien, though, so I can give you Christopher Tolkien's reaction. And he didn't like it. He said he never watched it, but he had an opinion anyway. I'm going to read you what Christopher Tolkien said about the Rankin Bass Hobbit. He said, as regards the question of the film, I have not seen it and do not intend to, but I have seen a book with pictures taken from the film. I will not deafen you with vociferous condemnation and say no more than I regard it with abhorrence, as a wholly unbelievable travesty of my father's work and a denial of the entire imagination and aesthetic outlook. I do not wish to be associated with the film in any way that I can help, nor would United Artists want my assistance if they knew my feelings. I hardly wish that the films of The Lord of the Rings were not being made, and I fear their advent. But even more, perhaps, the associated imbecilities of hideous toys and special breakfast cereals. It seems impossible to guess what effect the films will ultimately have. So J.R.R. Tolkien had sold off the rights a while ago. I kind of went into that a little bit ago, speaking of the Hobbit ashcan. Although he bought back, I forgot to mention that he actually bought back the rights to The Hobbit after that ashcan was produced for something like $100,000, but then he sold it again. So Christopher had no say in the making of Rankin Bass's The Hobbit, but he seems to be of the opinion that any adaptation at all is a monstrosity. He refused to even see the Hobbit cartoon, and he condemned it as sort of a cynical consumerist cash grab based on seeing pictures of it in a book. I normally praise Christopher Tolkien for all of his work. He worked really hard in preserving his father's legacy, but I think in some cases, and this is definitely one of them, he could have lightened up a bit. Okay, next question. This one comes from Simon Cook, who asks, while Fëanor was in the halls of Mandos, he would have had the chance to see how his decisions and actions were playing out back on Arda. Would he have regretted his actions, or was he just too arrogant? It's a good question, it really is. I think that Fëanor would be too arrogant, at least for a very long time. We know that Nama will hold an elf in Mandos for crimes or sins for a time, and the time that he does this is not specified usually. All elves get held for at least a little bit, as it takes a great violence to kill an elf. They require a new body. They can't go back to their old body because it's been ruined. So they must wait for the old one to dissolve. That was the exact word that Tolkien used. Though it is said that this happens rather rapidly in Middle-earth, and this does not apply to elves who die willingly with their bodies untarnished. Now, Fëanor would have to wait for his body in Middle-earth to dissolve, because when he died, his body burst into flames and burned to ash, sort of like an instant cremation. No one has ever died in this fashion before, and none have since. It was unique. This may have been the Valar making sure that Fëanor cannot return to Middle-earth, though even Morgoth could not leave Mandos without Namo's permission. The Valar were perhaps taking some extra precautions with Fëanor. If he was to ever return to life, he would need a new body. This is, of course, a guess. Tolkien never explicitly explained exactly why Fëanor's body burned like that. A lot of people say, well, his name, Spirit of Fire, but he's not a literal Spirit of Fire. It's more like fiery spirit. It's describing his personality, the name Fëanor. So, previous to Fëanor's death, Melkor had been locked in Mandos for what they refer to in the book as 3 ages. It's sort of a nebulous term, but it seemed to equate to just under 3,000 years, solar years as we would understand them. By comparison, by the time the 4th age started, Fëanor had been in Mandos more than twice that length. Were his crimes really worse than those of Melkor? Perhaps the comparison is apt, because the first go-around, anyway, we were not taking all of Melkor's crimes into account, just really the first war. His second trial ended with him being fully expelled from Valar. From Arda, by the Valar. Sorry, I'm a little out of sorts because I'm very tired. So anyway, what is the criteria for deciding how long an elf stays in Mandos? Is it decided to be a set amount of time? Is it when Namo says so, or when Manwë says so? Or do they have to show repentance? Fëanor will not return until the end of the world, when the final battle takes place, and he will break open the reunited Silmarils, which will revive the 2 trees of Valinor. The date of this event is not known. It may have been the event that ended the 4th age. It may have been much further into the future of Tolkien's world than that. We don't know. But either way, this is when Fëanor will finally be released and re-embodied. If we go by the guess, and really is just a guess, that an elf has to feel remorse and has to fully repent of all their actions, it may be possible that Fëanor will not repent for a very, very long time. And it seems I'm being texted again. I can't. Okay. I'm being texted. And I said, hey, I can't help you right now. I'm recording, and and then of course it's like, okay, I'll wait, and then a few minutes later, never mind, I figured it out on my own. I guess I wasn't needed. Oh dear. Okay, well that works for me. I don't have to feel like I'm in a rush now. Let's move on to the next question. Oh, okay, so here's the one from the thumbnail, right? Here's the one from the thumbnail, and this was asked by Jordan. Oh my God, I hope I am saying this right. Jordan Shui? I hope I'm saying it right. Well, anyway, Jordan asks, do you think Boromir really had the same dream as Faramir, or was he lying? And if he was lying, why? So I'm going to come right out and say it. He was not lying. Definitely not. For any of Boromir's flaws, dishonesty is not one of them. He was a very honest man. He had no reason to lie. Furthermore, Faramir was not there in Imladris. There wasn't anyone there who would have to point out that Faramir had the dream first. So if he wanted to lie, he could have said that the dream came to him and him alone. You know, he didn't have to mention his brother, but Boromir is sort of the kind of guy who gives credit where credit is due, and he was very close with his brother. He loved his brother, so he definitely wanted to give credit that his brother received the dream multiple times before it came to him. Now, this is important. It's obviously true that they both received the dream, because a recurring dream doesn't mean that much. But when two people have an identical dream, that is meaningful. That's a message from the Valar. That's important, and that's what got them talking to Denethor, and that's what got Boromir to go to Imladris. Okay, next question. This one came from Nikos Kokinos. I hope I said it right. Which books, except for the Lord of the Rings series, can I read to learn more about Aragorn, both as Thorongil and as he is now? So unfortunately, it's pretty much just the Lord of the Rings. His story is not really found in other books. Aragorn's story is told in full in the Lord of the Rings and its appendices. The Silmarillion gives us a chapter known as Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, which is pretty much the same story, but told by Elrond. It's not really new information. It's just the same information from a different perspective and a different writing style. And it's much shorter, obviously. The Third Age section of Unfinished Tales does not greatly concern Aragorn, just passing mentions here and there, the most important and interesting being his discovery of Isildur's effects in Orthanc after the war, but it does not tell of his past. Sorry to disappoint you. Okay, this one comes from Elizabeth McDougall, who asks, is it ever explicitly stated why the Ents of the First Age attacked the company of dwarves returning from the sack of Doriath? Did they have any further motivation for getting involved in the conflict beyond revenge on behalf of the elves? So this is a good question. I really like this question because I had to really delve a little bit for this one. It is implicitly stated that partly their motivation was indeed revenge, though not directly at the behest of Thingol, obviously, who died, or Melian, his widow, or the people of Doriath, but of Beren and Lúthien. I might point out that the Ents seemingly were created as sort of a counterpoint to the dwarves. Aule and Yavanna were sort of the bickering married couple that created them. Of course, Aule created the dwarves. Yavanna was a little worried that they were going to destroy too many of her trees, and with elves and men already on the way, she lamented yet another race that was just going to cut down trees. They were not going to view her trees as something beautiful that could just exist for what they are, but what they could be used for as a source of wood. And of course, then Aule was just like, well, they're going to need wood. Manwë, she went to Manwë, and after some prayer, Manwë reflected that she had already created the shepherds of the trees, the Ents, during the music, the Ainulindala, and that they would be the shepherds and the protectors of the trees. So she goes back to her husband and says, haha, your children will harm my children at their peril. And of course, Aule's like, well, they're going to need wood, though. So now this is not why the Ents attack the dwarven host fleeing the ruin of Doriath. They don't just go around attacking every dwarf they see, but it establishes early on that Ents have no love of dwarves due to their felling of trees. Now, specifically in the Silmarillion, we are only told that the dwarves were waylaid by Ents, and whether it's an opportunistic attack or revenge is not said. Though in letter 247, Tolkien offers a better explanation. In answering whether Ents figure into his other stories, other than the Lord of the Rings, that is, Tolkien stated that he did not envision the Ents as being part of the Silmarillion and the older stories due to the fact that he created them specifically for the Lord of the Rings. However, as Treebeard did wax poetic about the events of the First Age, and specifically Beleriand, he knew that he had to include them in some way. So he refers to a story that he had in his mind that he was working on in Osirian, which is now called Lindon, which wound up being the story that you referred to. So in this, he refers specifically to Lúthien as Thingol's daughter, and mentions that while Beren was to never interact with mortals, he did one time, attacking the dwarven army along with a host of Ents, revenging Lúthien's father, recovering stolen treasures, and the Silmaril. It does make sense. The dwarves had gotten through the Girdle of Melian specifically because there were some elves that didn't really like Thingol. They were kind of tired of him, so they let the dwarves in, and it seems that Thingol's daughter and his son-in-law, as the ones who would take revenge, that makes a lot more sense than just his people, who were a bit iffy on him at that point. Or at least some of them were. Okay, another question comes from an anonymous person who asks, how did elves originate in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings mythology? So the elves were created by Eru Ilúvatar, who is the supreme deity of Tolkien's world. They were called the firstborn children of Ilúvatar. Mortal men were the secondborn, or the aftercomers. And the creation myth, which is called the Ainu Lindale, which means music of the holy ones. So the myth, according to the elves, goes that there were 144 elves that were created, though they did not walk the world just yet, but they slumbered somewhere in the earth, the location unknown to all except Ilúvatar himself. Men were created at the same time, and they also slumbered to awaken at a time after the elves. The original 144 elves awoke in a place called Cuiviénen, at the bay of a sea called Helcar, which was named after a great tower, the Tower of Helcar, that once stood there holding up one of the two lamps that lit Arda. Melkor, who was sort of the head angel, but he had turned against Ilúvatar, he destroyed the lamps, and the ruin of the lamp in the north of primitive Middle-earth created the Sea of Helcar. With no light, Varda created more and brighter stars for the elves to be able to see and to use as signs. So after awakening, they were discovered by Erome, who called them the Eldar, which means people under the stars, though they called themselves Quendi, which means speakers. As Melkor had been capturing elves and tormenting, even turning them into an evil race that became the first orcs, Orome led many of them to the Undying Lands, though many of the elves chose to not partake in the Great Journey. They were called the Avari, which means the unwilling. Or perhaps many of them started the journey but didn't make it all the way and still stayed in Middle-earth. So after the changes that were made to the world during the War of Wrath and during the Akalabeth, Cuiviénen, which is the ancestral birthing place of the elves, no longer exists. Okay, moving on. This one comes from Nathaniel Popa, who asks, what are the limits of Sauron's ring's power? It's an interesting question, because to understand the limits of the ring, you must understand what the ring can do. What is the ring's power? And I think that's something that few people do, understand the power of the ring. To most people, you put on the ring and you vanish from sight. It's not a particularly powerful power, but it's handy if you're into sneaking around. This invisibility is actually a side product of the ring, which draws the user's body into a spiritual plane which most people cannot perceive. With this comes the ability to see wraiths clearly. Aside from this, the ring does not much else aside from halting your aging and possibly changing your appearance to match your surroundings, such as with Gollum. So it was stated that the ring gives power according to stature, but this is based off of the character's limited understanding of the ring. Gandalf thought that he would become like Sauron if he obtained the One Ring. Galadriel saw herself overthrowing Sauron with the ring. Boromir saw himself leading Gondor to victory and becoming a king. Even humble Samwise was given a vision. He was a hero who saved Middle-earth and made all of Middle-earth a garden. But we have to understand that these visions are false, something that I believe you're meant to deduce from the text. But due to the fact that the characters themselves at worst believe the visions and at best fear the visions, are led to believe anyone other than Sauron can tap into the power of the One Ring. Sauron poured the greater part of his essence into the One Ring. From this, we can understand the One Ring is more than half of the entity that we call Sauron. So, its power is his power. It cannot be used by anyone else. That's not to say that the One Ring cannot impart power to people, but it cannot be mastered. Any power it imparts is a means to an end, and that end is reunification with Sauron, and therefore becoming whole again. You cannot use the ring can use you. Understanding this, the ring's power is Sauron's power, just divorced from his frame and locked away behind his will. Sauron is a shapeshifter, so the ring can change its size. Sauron is a spirit, so it brings the wearer into a wraith world. Sauron is a trickster, so the ring gives false visions, which can extend to anyone in the vicinity, not just someone who's holding the ring, as with Boromir. On Sauron's hand, the ring enhances his powers of domination, allowing him to command others, most particularly anyone who wears a ring of power, who will become bound to him permanently, like the Nazgul. Now, as for the actual limits, well, we know what the ring can do, and that's about it. That's what the ring can do. It helps Sauron to dominate others, it keeps his power from diminishing, and that's really it. He can't use it to shoot magical beams or anything like that. Now, somebody in the comments brought up the fact that, several people touched upon the fact that Sauron feared that other people would use the ring against him, and that therefore from that we can deduce that other people can use the ring. And I will say that even Sauron does not truly understand the power of the ring. And you're going to say, well, how can you say that? How can Sauron not understand the power of the ring that is his own power, that he put into the ring, that he created it? How could he not understand it? And I'm going to tell you why. Because at the Council of Elrond, it was mentioned that until Sauron met Gollum and learned that his ring had been found, he thought that it had already been destroyed by his enemies. He thought that the elves surely would have destroyed the ring at this point. This tells us a few things. One, Sauron has no idea how the ring can be destroyed. He is not aware that it can only be destroyed in Mount Doom because he thinks the elves already destroyed it. Two, this tells us that he has no idea of the terrible effect that the destruction of the One Ring would have on him. He thought that it had been destroyed, meaning that he thought the destruction of the ring, while certainly not a good thing for him, would allow him to still operate in the world. And we learned, of course, at the end of The Lord of the Rings that it would be his final defeat, that he would be brought so low that he could not return ever. So, I have to say that Sauron himself had some misconceptions about the ring, based on the fact that he had made an assumption that the elves had destroyed the ring long ago, until he met Gollum, of course. Okay, next question. This one is anonymous. In which order should I read the books from the history of Middle-earth? It actually doesn't really matter all that much. The history of Middle-earth is not really a series of novels, it's a reference work. It's sort of like an encyclopedia of Tolkien's works. If you want to read about the alternate versions and writing processes of the Silmarillion, then you have the first ones. You have the Book of Lost Tales 1 and 2, the Lays of Beleriand, the Shaping of Middle-earth, and the Lost Road and Other Writings. If you want the same thing but for the Lord of the Rings, then you have the next few. You have Return of the Shadow, The Treason of Isengard, The War of the Ring, and Sauron Defeated. If you want mostly new information and context related to the history of Middle-earth, then there's the final 3 volumes, Morgoth's Ring, The War of the Jewels, and The Peoples of Middle-earth. And if you notice that when I speak of the history of Middle-earth, I mostly reference those 3 because they are sort of the most important ones. Some people will say you only really need to read those 3. Now, if you're seeking canon lore, those are the ones that are vital. But if you want to read about earlier versions and the writing process, that's when you would go into the others. Now, I also want to mention the nature of Middle-earth, because it's similar to those last 3. It's not officially part of the nature of the history of Middle-earth, but the nature of Middle-earth came out way later, but it is sort of in the same vein as Morgoth's Ring and the Peoples of Middle-earth and the War of the Jewels. So it's sort of an unofficial 13th part of the history of Middle-earth. Okay, next question. Another anonymous one. Who is Gil-galad? Is he related to Galadriel? See, even without knowing, you can kind of see it right there. Gil-galad, Galadriel, they have a similar name there. Gil-galad was the fourth and final High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, and he is indeed related to Galadriel. His full name is Iranian Gil-galad, and he became the fourth High King after the third one, Turgon, passed away during the fall of Gondolin. In the early drafts of the Legendarium, Gil-galad was a son of Finrod Felagund, and you might want to correct me there and say no, it was Fingon, but remember the character that was called Fingon at that point now was called Finrod at that point. Even Finrod Felagund, the whole name, and his son was Inglor, so it gets into a whole confusing thing, but that would make him Galadriel's nephew. However, this created an issue of succession, because Gil-galad would have become the High King before Turgon, not after him. So unfortunately, this oversight actually made it into the published Silmarillion because Christopher Tolkien, who was editing the work, found his father's note about Gil-galad being Orodreth's son. But he did not wish to rewrite a great deal of his father's work, as it would have been necessary to include the intended lineage. He later, in the Peoples of Middle-earth, said that this was a mistake and that he wishes he had just not mentioned the lineage at all. Regardless, in the current canon, Gil-galad is a son of Orodreth. Gil-galad remained High King through the rest of the First Age and on through the entirety of the Second Age, when he was slain by Sauron. There were no candidates for High King of the Noldor at this point, and too few Noldor in Middle-earth for a king in Middle-earth to be needed, so there was no successor, the only Noldor king being Finarfin in the Undying Lands. Gil-galad was also the original wielder of the Ring of Power Vilya, though he passed the ring to Elrond before his death. To trace Gil-galad's family tree to Galadriel, you can see that his father was Orodreth, who was the son of Angrod, who was one of Galadriel's older brothers, so Galadriel is his great aunt. Okay, next question. This one is requested by, wow, what a name, Edgar E. Maldonado. I hope I said it right. Did Frodo have any news of Bilbo during the 17 years after the party? Did he ever send a letter or a message with Gandalf? Frodo actually had no clue where Bilbo was during that time. Though Frodo later came to find Bilbo residing in the last homely house in Imladris, it's meant to be understood that he had only recently taken up residence there, and he had spent at least some of the 17 years wandering around and adventuring. He came to Imladris to rest, and he found that he preferred to stay. Frodo, for his part, continued celebrating Bilbo's birthday in the Shire along with his own, and several hobbits asked him if he thought Bilbo had died, and Frodo simply stated that he believed that Bilbo was still alive out there somewhere. Okay, and here's the last question. And just to bring this up to see that we got this in under an hour again. So look at that. Okay, so I should have put this question first, actually, but I didn't think of this. This was, and by the way, the name on this was requested by somebody who chose the name America's Sexiest Thick Man. So congratulations on winning that title, good sir. Anyway, America's Sexiest Thick Man has come to me to ask, would you call all of Tolkien's books in a single universe the Tolkienverse, or is there a different name to call Tolkien's universe and vision? So if you're watching this, you know the answer, not only because I answered you on Quora, but because I've said it a few times in the video. It's called the Legendarium. That's what Tolkien referred to it as, the Legendarium. Tolkien actually wanted to release the entirety, or at least the bulk, of his Legendarium all at once, with The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, and a reissue of The Hobbit coming out as a set, which he initially referred to as the Saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power. This didn't work out, obviously. It didn't happen. He abandoned rewriting The Hobbit, and The Silmarillion did not find a publisher until after his death, and along the way he had rewritten most of it. He was continually editing and revising and tinkering with the Silmarillion pretty much right up until he died. Many of the stories in the Legendarium are quite old. The oldest stories are Beren and Lúthien and the Children of Húrin, and also the Fall of Gondolin to a certain extent, which have been through dozens of different versions throughout the years. It is unknown exactly when Tolkien started using the term legendarium, but it is used in many of his letters referring to his work regarding Middle-earth and Arda. So that's what we call it. We call it the legendarium. Anyway, guys, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, you must enjoy the content. So please leave me a comment. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, share the video around a little bit. Anybody you know that likes Tolkien or wants to hear about Tolkien lore or has questions. And of course, if you have a question that you want to be featured in a video, feel free to click the link in the description of my Quora account. It's very easy to make an account yourself, and you could even use your Facebook or Google account that you may already have. Or if you don't want to be featured in a video and you just need your question answered, just leave me a comment and I'll get to it when I can. We'll see you guys next week.